Hi, guys.
Hello, hi.
Yeah, so before we go really into deep dive into the topic, we all use some context, some explanation why we're here. So the stuff that we're going to describe today, it's all based on our experience that we had over last year when we open sourced a project from SAP called Kyma, which is built on Kubernetes. And all the stuff that we're going to describe, it's all really around the tooling, of course, that is for free for open source. But most of it, if you have some commercial product and you have some budget to have commercial tooling, most of it is also reusable in the commercial products. So me, today, I'm in the role of product owner. So it was mentioned that I'm a product owner and a community manager for Kyma, but today I'm really showing how I feel about treating content as code literally from a product owner perspective.
Yeah, I'm the tech writer for several teams, also in the Kyma project, and I'm also the documentation owner. And I'm going to tell you more about the tech writer's perspective.
Okay, so let's start. So me as a product owner, I'm less interested with how the docs are provided, how people work on the docs. At the end, I want to have awesome product. I don't want to have only super cool, nice features, because I know that these days, when you have all those different frameworks, solutions in the open source, like Kyma, you really have to make a difference also with your docs. So I need to have really nice solution as a product owner to make docs for my product available in a nice way. So how we do it at the moment, so we have our own domain for docs, it's kymaproject.io, and we have you can find 3 different technologies that we use for publishing. So one is Gatsby, it's a free open source tool, a static site generator like many others, but this one particular is uber cool. So take a look deeper after the meeting. Then Algolia is the tool that we're using for search. Again, for open source, in the open source world, which is super cool for open source projects. Many different companies that have commercial products, they give stuff for free. So of course, we as an open source product get a nice free support from Algolia as a search engine. Then we have Netlify, that we use as a solution for hosting our website. So we gave up with GitHub pages. We said, okay, Netlify gives much more support. Again, it supports us because we're open source, so we have everything for free. That's what we choose. Now, if it comes to the sources of the content, that's all Markdown, and we keep everything in GitHub. So we have static site generators, Markdown, GitHub. Then I'm done. We're super innovative. But the thing is that we talked about it over the past years a few times already. So even Gosia introduced that I was here like 2016, and I already was doing a talk about static site generators and Markdown. So that's a stuff that is already here. But what we noticed with our experience over the last 3 years playing with Markdown, with static site generators, is that we can actually go really much further with the solution to provide docs. So what we noticed when we started working with Kyma, okay, if we have Markdown files, we store them together with the content, with the code in the same repo. We work on it exactly the same way as we work on the code. We can deliver them the same way we can deliver code. Then why not putting them behind some API? Why not having something that we thought will be great for our customers, for our users of Kyma, that they can get a baked-in docs inside the business application that they're using. So we have a console UI where developers, they can see what kind of applications they deployed to Kubernetes cluster. They can manage them. And whenever they have to do some operations in the console UI, instead of getting to the kymaproject.io, going to the doc section and going through all the versions and finding the right version and finding the right doc, they get actually baked in docs in the console UI. There's just separate UI where they can go and see the docs for the version of Kyma they're using at the moment. So that's cool, right? They have baked in docs. But then if it's behind API, what's the point of just having it in one view? If it's API, then you can have contextual help. So we can have contextual docs, really. What you can see here on the screenshot, it's a view from one of the functionalities of Kyma. So we have a strong opinion about service management in Kubernetes, is that you can actually give access to your developers to different services through a service catalog. So you can imagine developer starts a project, he goes to the catalog, and he sees a number of different services. And you can imagine, like, okay, if we need to provide documentation for all of them so he can make a decision which service to choose, why not giving him docs for a given service in the context? So we just took the API where we kept behind the API all the Markdown files and said, okay, let's always display docs for the developer in the context of a given service that he know about, he is considering if he should provision it or not, and then he can really get the content that he needs. Then really important stuff that we took into account as well, treating really the content as code literally, was, okay, Markdown is not everything. Developers love Markdown, but they also have their specifications. When they have a service, they don't like to provide reference docs for a service into the Markdown files, because anyway, they should also do it in the specs. Because specs are their contracts between their API and their users. So they anyway, if they do stuff properly, they provide the specs. So we said, okay, don't only support Markdown. Natively support also the specs. So you can see here the same, but different service, but the same view from the catalog, where you have a WordPress application, and you don't see a raw documentation, but you can actually see a interactive console which is generated out of the Open API specification. So let me now make a clear statement. If always really look for native support of the specs. Don't redo the work that developers do already. If they spend time on writing the specs, don't try to take their specs and write it again in Markdown or whatever. Just really always focus on natively supporting the specs. So if you have REST API, do Open API. If you have some modern applications with that are focused on event-driven architectures, then describe it with the async API spec. If it comes to other technologies, other interfaces to interact with the services, they also have their specs, like we also natively support OData. So at this point of time, I was not sure if we should go deeper into the topic, because it's we work on Kyma that is built on Kubernetes. Kubernetes has its jargon that if you're not really working on this kind of project, it's hard to understand. But I think it's really important to show you how even further we could go with the solution. So we notice, okay, if we can take the content, reuse it on Kyma project.io, put it also inside a cluster and put it behind the API, then why not giving it to our users? So they can extend Kyma, they can take Kyma, put their own services on top of it, and use our components. And we have it in the open source project. We call it now Headless CMS. There's no specific name like Kyma, so we don't have anything fancy, but at the end, you know what it is. So our customers and our developers internally, they can all use the same component to extend our UI with additional content wherever they want. And the cool stuff is that the thing you see at the moment at the screen, it's a simple YAM file. So within Kubernetes, if we are really basic in the explanation, when a developer deploys an application, he of course has to tell Kubernetes, okay, that's the deployment of my application. That's where you can find my Docker image. That's how you should deploy it in the system. That's how you should scale it. And with our approach, treating content as code literally, we said, okay, let's make sure that the solution we've built in is really treating content as code. So developer, when he applies description of his deployment, he can actually, in the same way, provide documentation for the same deployment. So here on the screenshot, you see an example of a Slack application where a developer can specify different sources for this specific documentation topic. So Markdown files stored on some different HTTP server, specs on different servers, and then at the end, our component makes sure that it's all placed in one location, hidden behind API, and everything works. So yeah, content as code literally works really well, and for me, as a product owner, really pays off.
Okay, I'm just going to take the clicker now. All right, so thank you, Łukasz, for sharing your insights from the PO's perspective. And now I would like to tell you more about how we technical writers perceive this whole content as code approach. First, a little bit of history. So I've been working with several tools so far. So I started with Confluence. And it was a kind of like more collaborative approach between the developers and technical writers. So we worked together on docs, but not exactly on code, right? Because it wasn't put in Confluence apart from maybe several code snippets, right? And then we actually decided to move from Confluence to DITA CMS. I don't know if you remember me from like 3 years ago, sharing my experience. Yeah, that was that. And then I decided maybe it's time to explore some other things. And I started my adventure with GitHub. And today I would like to, as I said, share my thoughts as the representative of technical writers. So what the process is for us, how it looks like, and also what the benefits are for us. So let's start with the process itself. So how is it done? How we do it? So it all starts with an idea, right? So there's this idea, the idea for the feature, or be it a whole new feature or a part of it. And we've got a dedicated dev team to work on it, right? So we've got really nice devs that code for us, right? So we have this feature, we have really a lot of code, but there is something missing in the picture, right? So yeah, here, worth mentioning is that in Kyma we release very often, we release every month. So we cannot just simply, roll out the features without any documentation to accompany them, right? I know that the developers are sometimes reluctant to write documentation, and then this happens, right? So yeah, documentation may be somewhere just maybe closer to the release. Yeah, we don't want that. We want it to be there exactly at the same time when the developers create code. And what I mean exactly at the same time is even within the same pull request, that it is then merged into the master branch and available on our Kyma website, right? So we've got the code part, we've got the documentation part, and together they have to be reviewed, right? So the process here is the same. So the same review applies to the code and to the to documentation, right? Even the number of what the fucks is probably the same in all in these two examples, right? So we've got the review done by the coders and also the review done by technical writers. We make sure that each documentation part, so each page, each README file is reviewed by a technical writer. Okay, after the review, we approve. So we know that the documentation they've done is pretty much awesome, and it all is approved and can be then merged into master and just appear on our great website and be available on GitHub as well. So that is how we do it. That's the process. And let me now share with you a really nice example of a pull request created by our beloved devs and technical writers. So this is an example of a feature, right? And we've got like 2 people involved in that. So we've got Karolina, who is our technical writer, and Paweł, who created or wrote the code, basically. And we've got like Łukasz in between, just accepting some things. So the creation process, as you can see, I don't know if I can just like, Okay, I don't want to play with that. So at the top, we've got Pavel creating code and adding some documentation to it. So it creates a README file or another piece of code. And sorry, code. Yeah, that's one thing, but also documentation. And once the README file is ready, Karolina gets notified as a technical writer. Here, there's some documentation for you to check. So she checks. We've got like a, quite long conversation going on there. So she checks, verifies if everything is fine, if the documentation needs some heavy reworking or maybe not, because it's written according to our guidelines and the templates available to our developers. And then she can also leave some remarks directly in the pull request, which Pavel then sees and can apply. There is even a very handy feature that GitHub provides, namely a suggestion. So a technical writer creates a suggestion that can be then right away committed by a developer. So he doesn't have to go to a separate tool, write it, and then commit it, right? So it's a nice way of doing that. So the pull request is approved, and then we've got some tests that have to be run before it is actually merged. And here again, it's the same thing, the same pipeline, let's say, for documentation and for code. We've got like several, for example, integration tests that apply to the code, but we also have link validation for our documentation. So before it's merged, we really make sure that is basically there and it's right, and we can approve that. So that's the flow. So the most important things here are that code and documentation really go hand in hand in here. They are created at the same time, reviewed, and then merged and visible on our website. Okay, so that's the thing. And then, but why? What are the benefits for the technical writers of such an approach? Maybe it's better to have a separate tool and just work there in the corner, right, as technical writers. But we've really identified several areas that can be perceived as beneficial for us. And the first is the context that we work with. So we, as technical writers, like to keep our documentation close to the code. And this approach allows us to do it. I'm going to elaborate on it a little bit more in a few minutes. Then we've got simplicity of contribution, both for internal and external contributors, right? So that's the second thing. And that leads to improvements that can be really applied really, really easily. So, for example, we've got a bug in documentation, there is a typo or something, and it comes to us from the reader's feedback. So we can easily just create a really small pull request and then just push it, and it's fixed, right? So no lengthy process of introducing improvements. And of course, our community of technical writers and developers working together. So starting with the context, just a couple of words on this. So as I said, working on documentation really close to the code. If we have everything in one pull request, it's really easy to see, okay, that this and that was done, and then it was documented, and how it was documented, and who documented it, right? So it's easy for both for technical writers, because we can just have a look at the code, and for the developers, because they know what they are documenting. So that's one thing when we talk about context. And the second thing is that we take our Markdown files, and as Łukasz just said, we can render them in different ways. So we can put them on the website. We've got these contextual docs. We also have our baked-in docs. So there are like several ways we can utilize just a single Markdown file. So that's the context part, and then the contribution. So this takes me to the simplicity part. It's really easy to contribute. You know, I think that it was mentioned today several times that Markdown is easy, right? It's really easy. So you just basically create a text file and work with it. So it's easy both for developers and other contributors, so technical writers and external contributors that want to, contribute to our repository and our code. So what is also worth mentioning here are we provide a set of guidelines. We also provide a set of templates, so if the developer needs to work on it, so work on a pull request, he can just take some templates, some guidelines, and it's really easier than just starting from scratch, right? So contribution is a really easy thing with Kyma. And then we've got the improvements. So then here we've got like an example of one of the improvements that we added, so the versioning. So to add versioning to our website, it was just plain easy because we just could take the versioning that we have in the code for Kyma that we use for our releases and then just apply it on the website, so make it work on the website. So it wasn't easy, it wasn't difficult because the code was already there, so it was really easy to render it on the website. And it's also worth mentioning that when it comes to improvements, both on the documentation side and also our website, it's really nice and easy to add them. So for example, we added recently the different node styles and the toggles that allow you to, for example, switch the context of the operating system that you are using. So we have even a dedicated team that works on the website and makes sure that our documentation is rendered properly, that it works based on the code that we have, and that all the improvements are added when necessary. So on the improvement part, it's also easy. And then when we talk about community, we of course have our developers, and we've got our writers. That's me when I think of all the code in the pull request there. So yeah, so we work together, and for me the most important thing, and I think that for you too, is that documentation is really treated as part of the product. It's not like the technical writers are somewhere there in the basement like working on some documentation stuff, but that we work together. So creating code and documentation next to it really puts the whole community together and creates mutual understanding between the developers and technical writers, which is also important for us. Okay, so is it really such a perfect world for us? Well, no, because sometimes we have our struggles, right? You may say that, okay, you can have like a more complex tool, you can have a separate tool that will help you create like documentation with better reuse, or like more advanced documentation, add variables and so on and so forth. I'm not talking right now about specific tool, but you all know what I mean. And yeah, so basically it's one thing. The second thing is, as it was mentioned today, also the merging can be difficult sometimes because you work on the piece of doc and then somebody else also contributes to that, which creates like conflicts, and you have to resolve them. So it can be difficult, it can be tricky as well. Yeah, but apart from that, I think that for our project, which doesn't contain like 10,000 pages, it's really a good approach. It brings us all together working on one beautiful documentation/code part. So I think that it's a really good thing for us. Which brings me to our takeaways for you. So I'm going to start just to sum it up a little bit. So for me, the same pipeline for documentation and code that facilitates the role of documentation in the product. So that means that, okay, you cannot just ship your part of code or your feature without any documentation to it, right? So that's one thing. Simple contribution rules. That means that everyone can contribute and it's easy. So it's easy for a dev that doesn't have to go to the writer, doesn't have to use another tool to just add some documentation on his or her own. And also the maintenance is easy because we just do it simply in one tool, which also brings me to improvements and extensibility, both when I talk about the website and also the improvements that we add every day to just make our documentation better. Okay, over to you, Łukasz.
Thank you. So, for me, as a product owner, one of the most important things was that you could see on the example of the pull request. So where really docs are treated together delivered together with the code. So when I'm getting a story finished from my team, I of course have to accept it to make sure that the feature is implemented as I want it. At the same time, I can also double check if it's documented as I want it. So the pull request that you could see, there were just 3 actors, Paweł, Karolina, and me. But then at the end, there was also, but it was pretty long thread, so we couldn't see, that Paweł's code was also checked by developers. So they were also at the same time checking the features, if it's coded right with the guidelines and etc. So that's pretty awesome stuff for me as a product owner. Then, of course, this reusability possibility. So really putting that Markdown files behind some API, that's just tremendous. You can really, stuff that people usually say about Markdown, it's not reusable, then at the end, if it's behind some API and it's having proper metadata, then yeah, reusing is, in any context, it's awesome. And at the end, what I showed is that we can actually give the same functionality to the devs that use Kyma, so to our users. But the coolest stuff, so now I'm talking as a product owner, but actually I started with IT as a technical writer 8 years ago. And what I think personally is the best is this stuff. So what you can see here on the right-hand side, it's not maybe readable, but if you're familiar with GitHub, it gives you this functionality that you can actually see who contributes to the project. So here you can see a screenshot from Kyma repository from GitHub that is getting already, it's having 600 stars and it's really getting popular. You can see that whenever someone goes to a contributors tab, in like first 14 people out of 79 contributors, you see actually 3 technical writers at the top, really. So that's really cool stuff to see how much they contributed to the value of the product. And yeah, now my hat as a community manager. If you're interested with checking how the flow of the PR works, how the tooling works, how we integrated all those fancy things like Gatsby, Netlify, or Algolia, you can find the sources of the docs easily on GitHub. You can also see how we built our website also, because everything is on GitHub. But the cool stuff is that you, as an experienced technical writers, if you go to our sources, you will easily find some mistakes. We're not perfect. We for sure have some errors. So even making small spell fix of a spell mistake, you can easily do it with GitHub and then interact with us, see how that flow works really in reality. And if you have more questions later, you're afraid to ask them now after the talk, or even once we are out there, then please join our open Slack, because like I said, Kyma is open source, so we have also open communication channel with all Kyma users. So if you would like to know more about stuff that we're doing, just go there and you're going to find us easily on Slack. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You guys come here. Those guys can barely see you. Like, for the questions, I'm going to make sure that you're visible to everyone, okay?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. Do you guys have questions to Basia and Łukasz? There is a question. Oh, that's a like, I really want that question. Yeah.
Oh my God.
I have a question to Basia.
Okay.
Regarding the organization of works with development team, because I find your situation kind of similar to mine, and also the flow sounds kind of Scrummy for me. Are you working in Scrum?
Yes, we do.
Okay, so I have a question, because you said that you worked and delivered together as a Scrum. So I have a question, if you are part of one team, like developers and writers are one team, or you are 2 separate teams working in one Scrum?
So we as technical writers work for teams. So we strive for perfection. So having one technical writer per team. Sometimes there are like more teams that we help, but usually, yeah, we work closely with the team of developers. And apart from that, we have our own special interest group devoted to content. So so we meet we meet each week, and we discuss some documentation matters. Everyone from Kyma can join us, and if there is anything we can address, it's like discussed during this special interest group. But mostly we work as technical writers inside of teams. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, guys, just to let you know, we have some extra gifts for the questions from the guys here. Łukasz, do you wanna explain what they are?
Yeah, so it's open source, so we have to have some swags. So we have 2 T-shirts with Kyma logo. One is M Lady, and the other one is L Men. And we also have 2 super cool Lego figures to give away, so to encourage you to ask questions.
Thanks.
Okay, we have one more question from Meike.
So I just have a follow-up question to the question before with regard to the teams. So do you have a team lead documentation? Are you a documentation team and you are just working with the Scrum teams, with the product engineering teams as kind of dedicated writer? Or are you from the structure embedded in the engineering teams? Because we have a similar situation. We are also open source. We are working Scrum and we are working Waterfall, so really everything. And we have dedicated writers in the documentation team that are kind of related to the product engineering teams, but they are reporting inside the documentation team. And we find there are some embedded writers in the product engineering teams, and that's a bit difficult of a structure. So I would be interested to see how it is within Kyma.
Yes, so we are embedded in teams, basically.
Okay.
So we work together as writers because we like it also to just exchange information, but we are primarily embedded in teams.
And you report to that team. How does it scale
Yes.
if you have to work on other projects or?
Lots of juggling, I would say.
Well, yeah, okay, I see.
But it's doable. But the ideal situation for me is having just one writer embedded in the team, because it's then, you can just focus more on what the team is doing and like really cooperate and work closely with them.
But you have different escalation paths, and if there is difficulties, it's also hard.
It's just solved within the team.
Okay.
Yeah, it all works within the team. So generally, development team, just a regular Scrum thing, and a technical writer also in the development team.
Okay, thank you.
But if I may add something, so I think it's also important to mention again what you mentioned at the beginning. So writers are in the teams, but we also, because we're building on Kubernetes, we decided to also work as Kubernetes team. So we have also special interest groups. So we have a content special interest group that groups not only the writers, but also people interested with the content. So whenever there's some demand, someone can join the group once a week for a talk or on a Slack channel, asks for some support. Me as a product owner, I'm there pretty regularly to also see how technical writers want to improve documentation, how the content strategy should be changed maybe. So that's how it works cross teams.
Yeah, but it's just we are not reporting to anyone. It's just like a group.
But quite often also happens with this example of Pavel, right? So of course it's not always perfect world. It's not always going to happen like this, that a developer can really deliver really good quality structured documentation. But very often he can, because we also did pretty good work in structuring the content. So in many cases, like Pavel from my team, he was working on a service, but 2 sprints before he was working on another service, which was basically just another feature, super similar to what he was working on 2 sprints later. So for him, adding additional content, seeing how he did it before with support of technical writer, it was much faster and much simpler. So Carolina from my team that was super busy with different subjects where she had to help with, Pavel was alone really to provide the whole content. So that's how we try to help each other as well.
I know there was one more question here, one there, and one there, and one there. Okay, 4 more questions. That's a lot of questions.
Hi, another question to Basia. So you mentioned that when you do a commit, there is also testing to be done, right? Both for code and documentation. Could you elaborate a bit on how you test documentation?
That's a tricky question. We talked about it today. We got like a lengthy conversation about how basically we test docs. Yeah. So what I meant here by testing was well related to the links. So we've got a dedicated pro job that runs after each commit, and then then validates the links. But when it comes to like documentation, testing documentation, I would say it has to be done by a technical writer, like in just plain simple manual ways. So just reading and checking if everything works as it should. Or do you have any other thoughts on this, Łukasz? No, it's just clicking.
I mean, at the end, it's all possible. It's just a matter of having time to do it.
Yeah.
So for now, the most important for us was to really have links validation. And that's what we quickly integrated, also thanks to the support of one of the nerds from my team that works a lot after hours.
Yeah.
But then adding testing of the instructions, that's also doable, but yeah. There are other priorities as well.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, you guys, there are so many questions. Okay, we can afford 3 more questions, and I know that Michał was here. There was a question from Michał in front, and there was a question up there. Yes. Oh, okay. I'm sorry, I didn't notice you have the mic. Okay.
Hello. I think this one is for you, Łukasz. So you feel useful. Okay, so I have a question about technology behind your solution. Why did you pick Gatsby over other static site generators? Why not, for example, Next.js or something like that?
So there are many freaks in my team if it comes to React.js. With Gatsby, that's React.js behind. So you can really with React.js way provide a static site which is super fast because of the componentization and split of the files, etc. So yeah, that's what makes the page work much faster, and at the end it motivates devs from my team to contribute.
Okay, are you using GraphQL support in any way?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
And also for the baked-in docs, at the end, by default Kubernetes, whenever we put some content into it, it exposes the REST API. But for the UI, we have a GraphQL layer on top to have really nice fast loading of the content.
Thank you.
We have a question here.
Yeah, hello, I'm Kasia from Sabre. My question is, because you told us about all the API specifications or the Markdown files, so additional data in case of features, and what about real code examples? Because now we are facing that problems that who, when, and how is gonna give you the real code examples, not only the schema fitted by the sample value of the field, but real example of the feature. How are you dealing with that?
So all those examples are provided by devs. We are not yet in a stage where we have clear content strategy if it comes to such an examples. But what we for now experimented with, we have a separate repository called examples. So real examples are actually real projects, which we can later on test. So we just have a README file that explains what you can find in a specific folder, where's the code, how it's integrated. And then it's much nicer for the developer because he can build the project on his own locally and play with it. So that's one way. Of course, in the raw documentation, of course, we have some instructions, which, again, we're not testing yet. So, but they provided by the devs. And the rule we have is that they have to be provided always in the nice, easy way that you can just copy, paste in the terminal, copy, paste in the terminal. So it's relatively easy for the developer, for the technical writer, during the review when he can see the docs to really try them on his own, on her own, in the terminal.
It's because it's really hard to know if that code example is up to date for us? Is it the same as we have in the API specification, etc.? We are trying to find the answer, how to check it.
Yeah. So I don't have yet any answer, but the thing is that, I mean, I remember my previous project, and we had concerns like you have. But the thing is that the way we really now work, nobody is really, it's not the ideal word, of course, but nobody is really afraid of it, because the way we work with the content and code at the same time, developers quite often look into the docs to confirm if whatever they coded is not changing, etc. So these mistakes, we don't even see them because they are covered by developers at the stage of giving in a pull request with the input. So.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, we have one last question. Right.
Hello, my name is Christopher. I'm from Synchron Warsaw. I'm a technical writer. I have a question for Basia, I think. It's a very interesting workflow for me that you contribute as technical writers to the same repository as developers, and that developers create documentation, and then you as technical writers review it. And you said that you can provide suggestions, and then the developer can just accept them. Could you tell us, please, what tool do you use for that?
So that's basically a feature of GitHub, I would say, right? So when you review the file, you can just simply click a line, and then you've got like a small button that says suggestion, and it becomes like committable suggestion. So when I add it to my review, then when the developer takes it, he can just right away commit it and doesn't have to go to his own tool like editor or something and then fix or just apply the comments, but it's just easier, and then all the review parts become committed and pushed, and it's just easier for developers to work that way. But it's not like we are doing purely reviews. It's one side, but we also work on documentation, like as technical writers, just creating new documents, and then of course it's a just pull request with documentation, just purely documentation that is reviewed by another writer. So it's not only like, it's collaboration is a great part of our life, but we also work on documentation ourselves. Yep. I don't know if that like answers your question, but we just use a GitHub feature for that.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
That was what I was asking about.
Okay, thank you guys.
Don't finish it. So I have one extra Kyma Lego swag with a special question to the audience. So the person that is first to raise the hand will get it. So the question is, and it's all because of Janusz Dokumentacji that called me out on Twitter. So maybe he's watching the stream, maybe he's going to help with giving the answer.
He is.
But the question is, Liverpool, how many times they won the Champions League? Who knows the answer?
There is a hand.
There is a hand, yeah.
6 times, isn't it? Thank you.